Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that quorum call in progress be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, a while ago we were talking about the unanimous consent request that was objected to by Senator Hutchinson to bring my pilot's Bill of Rights by unanimous consent and under actually Senate Rule 14. During that time, it was the intention of Senator Begich, Mark Begich from Alaska, to be on the floor with me. He was tied up with constituents, and I didn't feel that I wanted to talk about him unless you were down here, but I have visited with him, and I just want to say, because I know right now we have, I don't know how many, but thousands and thousands of pilots that are watching us at this moment, to know that Mark Begich has been my co-sponsor of my legislation, and I want to tell you that we would not be able to be here and doing what we're doing as far along with 66 co-sponsors if we hadn't had his cooperation. So I really want to thank, and I want to thank the junior senator from West Virginia, Senator Manchin, who's been by my side on this legislation all the way through. And I just want to make sure that the pilots of America know who does want them to have equal justice under the law and who perhaps does not. So I thank the chair, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from West Virginia.
First of all, I want to thank my good senator from Oklahoma, Senator Inhofe, on his leadership on this very, very important piece of legislation. I'm proud to be part of that with you, sir, and the leadership you've shown for us fellow pilots, and basically the only connection we have in some rural parts of not only West Virginia but all over the country is our private aviation. We hope to keep that alive and well, and I know in your state, Mr. President, the same, and we appreciate all the support, and we appreciate your leadership, sir. Mr. President, I rise today to speak about a very important issue that I believe will truly help each and every one of us, every senator and every congressman from all 50 states, accomplish something meaningful when it comes to fighting the prescription drug abuse epidemic that is plaguing communities all over this great nation. Mr. President, I have not talked to a person in my state that has not been affected through a person in their immediate family or extended family with prescription drug overuse. And it's something that is epidemic proportion that we have to fight and work together. Less than a month ago, I was so proud when the Senate came together to unanimously support an amendment I offered with Senators Mark Kirk, our dear friend, Kirsten Gillibrand, Chuck Schumer, and Jay Rockefeller, that would make it far more difficult to abuse addictive pain medication by reclassifying drugs containing hydrocodone as Schedule II substance. Let me explain what this means. In practical terms, moving hydrocodone to a Schedule II drug means that patients will need an original prescription to get their pills refilled. Pills will be stored and transported more securely, and traffickers will be subject to increased fines and penalties. As we speak, negotiations are ongoing between the House and the Senate on a compromise version of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. The Senate version contains my amendment, and the House version does not. So we're fighting as hard as we can to make sure this amendment is included into the final bill. Last month, I stood here on the Senate floor and shared stories that I heard in communities across West Virginia about why this amendment is so urgently needed. Prescription drug abuse is responsible for about 75% of the drug-related deaths in the United States and 90% in my home state of West Virginia. According to the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, prescription drug abuse is the fastest growing drug problem in the United States, and it's claiming the lives of thousands of Americans every year. But no statistic can illustrate the scope of this problem like hearing the pleas of children who are begging their leaders to do something to get drugs out of their communities. Children like those I met in Wyoming County, West Virginia last October, where more than 120 people have died from drug overdoses in the past 7 years, including 41 last year and 12 already this year. Mr. President, since that proud moment when the Senate unanimously passed my hydrocodone rescheduling amendment, it has come under fire, as you can imagine, from groups who seem to think that trying to limit the number of hydrocodone pills making their way into our communities and oftentimes into the wrong hands is a bad idea because it affects their bottom lines. Now, I recognize that this amendment does not fit into the business model of selling as many pills as possible. I understand that. But with that being said, I believe we have a responsibility to this great nation, and especially to the youth of America. This will affect us for generations to come, sir. To win this war on prescription drugs needs to happen now. And it is one of the most abused substances. Hydrocodone is one of the most abused substances we have and the most addictive. I don't think I've talked to a person who does not recognize that each and every state is experiencing these horrible problems with this prescription drug abuse. And the facts will bear this out. According to a report issued by the Centers for Disease Control in November, the death toll from overdoses of prescription painkillers has more than tripled in the past decade. The finding shows that more than 40 people die every day from overdoses involving narcotic pain relievers like hydrocodone, methadone, oxycodone, and oxymorphone. These prescriptions, painkillers, are responsible for more deaths than heroin and cocaine combined. Yet still we are hearing from some folks who just don't believe that rescheduling hydrocodone is a good idea. And I have said to these groups, let's work together on a compromise that can address your legitimate concerns. If anyone has a concern with this amendment, just come to me, and we'll sit down with you and try to work through it in the most reasonable manner. We've already offered a number of compromises to different groups in an effort to get this bill passed and signed into law. I want to clarify some of these concerns. We've heard from some with concerns that making hydrocodone a Schedule II drug would mean that patients with legitimate need for these medications would face increased hurdles to obtaining them, and that those patients would have to visit the doctor more often. To them, I would say the following. Look at what the DEA did in 2007 to reduce burdens facing patients when it comes to refills. They finalized a new rule allowing doctors to provide individual patients with a 90-day supply of any Schedule II medication by issuing 3 separate prescriptions, 1 for an immediate supply and 2 additional prescriptions that cannot be filled until a certain specified date. If they receive a 90-day supply, patients would only need to visit their doctors 4 times per year. And if they have a chronic ailment, I would think that those patients would want that type of evaluation anyway. That makes all the sense in the world to me, and I know to a lot of Americans. If a practitioner is prescribing medication as part of a usual course of professional practice and for a legitimate medical reason, there is no numerical limitation on the quantity they can prescribe. Federal law does not limit physicians to providing only a 30-day supply of medication. The amount prescribed and length of treatment is within each doctor's discretion. We've also heard from those who are worried that pharmacies could face increased operating costs caused by new storage requirements, as well as increased paperwork. But there is no difference in federal storage requirements between Schedule III and Schedule II drugs. Federal law requires that all controlled substances be stored in securely locked, substantially constructed cabinets. As for more paperwork, pharmacies are already doing paperwork on their current Schedule II drug orders. All this amendment would require is including an additional line on the existing form that specifies how many hydrocodone combination pills they are ordering. The bottom line is we have to recognize that this is a very, very addictive drug. As a Schedule III drug, hydrocodone is very available to people who might not use it for the right purposes, but for illicit purposes. All we are saying is give us a chance to protect some of the most vulnerable people that we have, especially our young people, who are addicted to these prescription drugs. Look at all the people who support this amendment, Mr. President. The folks who are out there on the front lines trying to keep our society safe and fight the war on drugs so that we can all be in a better society and more protected. We have groups like the Fraternal Order of Police, the National District Attorneys Association, the National Narcotics Officers Association Coalition, the National Troopers Coalition, the National American Society of Addictive Medicine, the National Association of Drug and Alcohol Interventionists, the West Virginia Medical Professionals Health Program, the Drug-Free America Foundation, Inc., the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse, and the Prevention Partnership. These people are on the front lines, and they're saying this amendment is needed, and that will help them immensely fight this war on drug. These are the people who are out there helping us every day in society. We're willing to sit down and work with people if they have legitimate concerns. But if your concern is that this amendment interrupts your business plan, I would hope you would rise above your business plan and be an American first. What we are trying to do is good for this country. It's good for each one of our states. Now, I know it would be good for the state of West Virginia and, Mr. President, the state of Vermont. For generations to come, that we will be working hard and we will be protecting them for the quality of life of as Americans. I'm not trying to put anyone out of business. I'm a business person myself, and I appreciate the hard work of businesses all across this country and the risk they take and the dedication they have. But when you have a problem, you've got to fix it. And we have got a problem, sir. And this amendment is not going to solve all of our problems. We recognize that. And it's not going to eliminate prescription drug abuse once and for all. But it does give us one more tool to fight the drug abuse problem that we have in this country. And to get this passed, it's going to take the voices of the public, not just the voices in this chamber or across the Capitol, but the voice of the public, the voices of people who have seen what is done to our families, to our children, and our communities. We need their voices saying, we can't stand by and watch this happen any longer. Voices like those from Oceana Middle School in my state, it's Wyoming County in the state of West Virginia, who participated in a letter-writing campaign to their elected leaders asking for help with a drug epidemic. One of them wrote to me, "My town, Oceana, has an issue about drugs. I write this letter to you because I hope you can do something about it. In 2006, my grandmother died of an overdose. She was the only person I could talk to. Drugs make people act in bad ways, and if something doesn't happen about them, then our town will be in worse shape." Mr. President, I've been there many times. I was there as a young person in college. My roommate was from Oceana, one of the most beautiful little cities I'd ever attended. I came back 40 years later. You wouldn't recognize it. You would not recognize it, what has happened. And these are young, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old middle school children crying out for help. They know what's happened to their families. They're afraid to go out in their own streets. They need help. And this is happening all over America. These students, they want a better life for their parents. They want a better life for their siblings. They want a better life for their friends. They want a better life for their community. And also they want a better life for themselves. They're willing to fight, and we should be willing to fight for them. That is our job, and that's what we were sent here to do. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Notice the absence of quorum. I'm sorry. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, do I have the floor now?
Yes.
May I speak as if in morning business?
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I come before the Senate today to speak about a number that has a particular significance for us here. That number is 400. Now, why is 400 an important number at this point in our history? What's important about 400 is that it is the number of parts per million of carbon dioxide that has been measured this spring in the Arctic. It's a first. We've never hit 400 before. For 8,000 centuries, mankind has inhabited this planet within an atmospheric carbon dioxide range of 190 to 300 parts per million. That's been the range. That's the bandwidth that we've lived within. How long? It's 800,000 years. It's a pretty darn long time. I don't think there are any human remains or artifacts that go back further than 200,000 years. You go back more than 10,000 years, you're only seeing the very beginnings of agriculture, of people beginning to scratch the soil and plant things. So for longer than our species has effectively inhabited this earth, we've been in this happy bandwidth that has supported our lives, has supported a congenial climate for human development, and we are out of it for the first time in that period. 800,000 years. And we're not just a little bit out of it. We didn't go to 302. We didn't go to 350. We've now crossed 400. And we're still going. We are still going. And there is no end in sight. We continue to dump gigatons of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere every single year. We continue to subsidize the people who do the dumping. And at least in this building, and probably in the boardroom of ExxonMobil and a few other places, we studiously ignore the facts that are right before our faces. Right before our faces. Here are just a few stories from the past week or so. A June 4th story in the New York Times reported that climate change threatens power output. Now, why would a warming climate threaten power output? Because warmer waters, when they're pumped through power plants, don't provide the same cooling capacity. So if you're going to keep the plants from overheating, you have to dial back the power output. And for places like the heavily developed U.S. Northeast, we can be pretty close to our margins from time to time, particularly when air conditioning loads are high in the summer. And on those hot days, that increases the risk of power cutbacks or conceivably even power outages. A June 5th story in the U.S. News and World Report described a recently published article in which several European public health experts write that climate change could alter patterns of foodability, change disease distribution, all in ways that could harm human health. If you want an example of how the change in climate changes the way that things move around on this earth, you have to look no farther than the pine beetle, which is decimating our traditional western forests because the winters are no longer cold enough to kill off the larvae. So as the warmth moves ever northward, so do the larvae, and you can fly over mountains and look down and see just brown wasteland trees that used to be green pine forest. NOAA reported that the lower 48 states just experienced the warmest May on record. The national average temperature for this spring, March through May, was 5.2 degrees above the 1901 to 2000, the 20th century long-term average, surpassing the previous warmest spring ever, 1910, by 2 full degrees. Some states warm faster than others, and Rhode Island, unfortunately for us, is at the top of the list. Climate Central, a research organization, crunched averages of the daily high and low temperatures from the National Climatic Data Center's U.S. Historical Climatology Network of weather stations. Their recently published report determines that over the past 100 years, Rhode Island has actually warmed the fastest of any state. This has terrible consequences for us, from shifting our growing season to harming the cold water fish we catch in our warming Narragansett Bay. Personal aside on this, when my wife was doing her graduate research out in Narragansett Bay, she was studying the interaction between winter flounder and a shrimp that lives in the bay called Crangon septum spinosa. And the reason that that research was important then was because winter flounder was a huge cash crop for our fishermen. It hasn't been that long since she did her graduate research, and winter flounder has fallen off as a cash crop for Rhode Island fishermen because Narragansett Bay has warmed. Its mean winter water temperature is up nearly 4 degrees, which may not seem like us to terrestrial beings when we jump in the water, 61 degrees, 65 degrees. Does that really make a difference to us? No. But to the fish, for whom this is their entire ecosystem, that is an ecosystem shift. And it has completely demolished the winter flounder fishery. It's down something like 10 times. Many people understand that there is a connection between carbon pollution in our atmosphere and these warming temperatures, but it's becoming incontrovertible that these things are happening. The science behind this is rock solid. People say that there are questions about the theory. No. No, there are not. There are questions about some of the complicated modeling that people go through, but the theory has been clear since the time of the American Civil War. The scientist John Tyndall, Tyndall, determined that increasing moisture and increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had a blanketing effect that kept heat in and trapped heat on our planet. That's been basic textbook science for a century. It's never been controverted. It's a law, essentially, of science. And yet, there are special interests here who try to deny that. Set against those special interests is about as unanimous a coalition from science as has ever been assembled. Virtually every prestigious scientific and academic institution has stated that climate change is happening and that human activities, specifically our reckless release of carbon pollution, are the driving cause of this change. In 2009, there was a very, very clear letter signed by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Chemical Society, the Geophysical Union, the Institute of Biological Sciences, the Societies of Agronomy and Plant Biologists, the Statistical Association, the Botanical Society, the Crop Science and Ecological Societies, the National Science Collections Alliance, and on and on. And here's what they said, in words that, for scientists, are pretty darn hard-hitting. Observations throughout the world make it clear, clear is the word they used, that climate change is occurring, and rigorous scientific research demonstrates that the greenhouse gases emitted by human activities are the primary driver. Not observations throughout the world make it likely that climate change is occurring, not rigorous scientific research potentially indicates, not that greenhouse gases emitted by human activities might be the primary driver, but that it is clear, that it is demonstrated, and that they are the primary driver. They go on, these conclusions are based on multiple independent lines of evidence. And here's what you might call the sockdologer. Contrary assertions are inconsistent with an objective assessment of the vast body of peer-reviewed science. In a nutshell, if you're looking at the actual peer-reviewed science, and if you're being objective, if you're not putting your thumb on the scales, contrary assertions are inconsistent with that. You're basically making it up. So that's a pretty powerful statement. The argument that the jury is still out on climate change is a false and bogus argument. The jury is not out. In fact, the verdict is in. The effects are obvious. They surround us every day, and we need to take action. I've been here on the floor with Senator Franken before, and we've talked about this, and he makes a wonderful point, which is that 97% of the climate scientists agree that this is happening. It's happening because of our carbon pollution, and we need to do something urgent about it. 3% question it. 97 to 3 is the odds. And we're asked to avoid taking any action, don't worry about it, because there's doubt, because there's debate. Well, translate that to your real, ordinary human life, not this peculiar political world that we're in down here, but in your ordinary human life. Let's say you have a child, and the child appears to be sick. And you go in to see the doctor, and the doctor says, yep, your child is sick, and she's going to need treatment. And you say, ooh, yeah, the treatment's kind of expensive, it might be a little bit unpleasant, there might be side effects. Tell you what, I'm going to get a second opinion. So you go to another doctor. And the other doctor says the exact same thing. Your child is sick, going to need treatment. And you say, well, 2 opinions. That's kind of a lot, but let's just be sure here. Let's get a 3rd opinion. And that doctor said the same thing, too. What would you think of the parent who did that 100 times? Who was told by 97 out of 100 doctors that their child was sick and needed treatment, and then said, you know what? There's doubt about this. I'm not sure. I'm not going to give my child the treatment that they need. It's a preposterous example, isn't it? It is an absolutely ridiculous point of view for the parent to hold. Yet that is exactly the point of view that we are being asked to hold as we deny and delay the steps that we have to take to protect ourselves, to protect our children, to protect our country from the damage that is being done, frankly, by ourselves, by the polluting interests that we don't take adequate steps to put on the right track towards a successful and clean energy future. The last thing I'll say is on that exact point. The more we depend on fossil fuels, the more we depend on a diminishing resource that pollutes our country, that as it diminishes forces prices up under the laws of supply and demand, and that in practice and right now forces us to engage with foreign oil-producing countries that do not have our best interests at heart, and we send our dollars, hundreds of millions of them, into their treasuries so that that money can filter out into organizations that actually wish to do us harm. That's not a great state of affairs. The alternative is a clean energy future where American homes are more efficient. We've replaced windows. We've added insulation. We've improved boilers. We've created innumerable jobs through all that work, and we've paid for it with reduced energy costs. It pays for itself, sometimes in a year, sometimes in 2 years, sometimes in 5 years, but it pays for itself, and it creates work. We're in a battle right now for clean energy technologies. It is an international competition. It is us against China, us against India, us against the European Union. Every single one of the other countries gets it, and they are trying to push resources onto their clean energy industries so that they can lap us in this race. They can get so far ahead of us that we become the world's biggest global consumer of clean energy, not its biggest manufacturer. We invented the solar cell. 15 years ago, we made 40% of all the solar cells in the world. We're down to, I think, 7% now. The top 10 wind turbine countries in the world include 1 American company, 1. And by knocking down the production tax credits, by eliminating the 1603 program, by subsidizing like crazy big oil, people in this building are doing their very best not to help us in the race against foreign competition, but to put weights in the pockets of American companies, to tie their shoelaces together, to interfere with our ability to compete. They don't see it yet as international competition. They're so tied to the fossil fuel industry, they only see it as competition between fossil fuels and clean energy, and in that battle they want to be with the fossil fuel industry. They don't see the future. They don't see how important these technologies are going to be in batteries, in wind, in clean energy, in all of these areas where we not only can command our energy future by building and creating the power that we use and unhinge ourselves from these foreign dictatorships that run off oil economies, but we can improve the future and the safety of our planet by dialing down the pollution. My state pays a particular price. We are downwind of the Midwestern polluters. The big utility companies, the big manufacturing companies, the ones that have built 1,000-foot high smokestacks for the specific purpose of shoving as much of their pollution as high in the atmosphere as they can so that it doesn't rain down on their states, not on Missouri, not on Ohio, not on Pennsylvania, that it rains down on Rhode Island, on Massachusetts, on Vermont, on other states. I was here earlier this morning talking about the mercury rule. We have ponds and lakes and reservoirs in Rhode Island where it is unsafe to eat the fish that you catch because of mercury poisoning. It's unsafe everywhere in Rhode Island to eat the fish that you catch if you're a child or an expectant mother. But in these ponds, nobody can safely eat the fish that you catch because there's so much mercury in them. How did the mercury get there? How did the mercury get there? From pollution. Out of the smokestacks, dumped down on our state. There is nothing that we can do to prevent it other than to support EPA in these mercury limit rules. So there's a real cost to continuing down this fossil fuel path. My home state pays it all the time, and when it comes time to reap the whirlwind of storm activity, of sea level rise, coastal states like Rhode Island will pay a particularly high price. So I'm going to continue to come to the Senate floor. This is not a popular topic. The presiding officer, Senator Sanders of Vermont, is eloquent, articulate, and a constant ally on these subjects. There are probably there's a handful of us who are regular on this subject, but I think for a great many of my colleagues, and particularly for virtually everybody on the other side of the aisle, they just as soon wash their hands of it, forget about it, pretend it's not happening, and continue to sleepwalk towards disaster. So I'm going to keep doing this. It's important to my state. I think it's important to our country, and I appreciate the attention of the presiding officer and those who have the attention of the floor. Thank you very much. I yield the floor. I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Mississippi.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with,
Without objection.
and I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, I rise today to express my serious concern about a matter of national security. It is a matter that is increasingly more visible with the American people. It's a matter that they are more and more concerned about as they hear more. It's an issue that is not going away until it's properly investigated by the executive branch of this government. And that, of course, is the recent news publications that discussed details of counterterrorism plans, programs, and operations of our government. These publications refer to specific counterterrorism, military, and intelligence activities that are among the most classified and highly sensitive national security operations involving our military and our intelligence community. The leaks of this information constitute a grave breach of our vital national security interests. The President, in his press conference last Friday, attempted to distance his administration from these damaging leaks, stating that the notion that my White House would purposely release classified national security information is offensive. The matter is certainly offensive and needs to be fully investigated. But I must point out that the President did not explicitly deny that members of his administration were responsible for leaking classified or sensitive information to the media. As a matter of fact, so many of the news reports, quite frankly, point to members of this administration for these damaging and criminal leaks. Any mishandling of classified material must be taken with the utmost seriousness. The authors of these publications cite unnamed senior administration officials and presidential aides as their sources. We need to know the names of these senior administration officials. We need to know the names of these presidential aides. And we need to know, quite frankly, if they were engaged in criminal breaches of our espionage and intelligence statutes. Our men and women in the military and our intelligence community officials work under extremely difficult conditions. These leaks have put their lives in danger. These leaks have put their methods and their ongoing operations at risk. They need to stop and they need to be investigated. All individuals privy to the White House discussions regarding counterterrorism and intelligence operations hold security clearances at the very highest levels. Before being granted access to these classified items of information, individuals must undergo a thorough background investigation and receive extensive security training regarding proper procedures for handling classified materials. They are trained as to what they can say and what they ought not to say. They're trained as to what the law requires and what the law prohibits. It is clear that any potential leak of classified material was not an accidental slip of the tongue, but a deliberate and brazen violation of federal law. And we need to get to the bottom of this. I will also add that we are not talking about an isolated incident, an isolated instance of a leak. As the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Senator Dianne Feinstein, rightly observed last Wednesday, we are talking about what she described as an avalanche of leaks. An avalanche of leaks, Mr. President, on national security matters that have, in her words, put our nation's security in jeopardy, unquote, to quote the chair of the Intelligence Committee. To further quote Chairwoman Feinstein, a number of those leaks and others in the last months about drone activities and other activities are frankly against all national security interests. I apologize. Here I'm quoting the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Mr. President, Senator John Kerry. I'll read again since I've got the citation correct. A number of these leaks and others in the last months about drone activities and other activities are frankly all against national security interests, said Chairman Kerry. He goes on to say, I think they're dangerous, damaging, and whoever is doing that is not acting in the interest of the United States of America. And yet news reports say that these reports come from senior administration officials. We need to find out who these administration officials are. And then further to quote Senator Feinstein, who I began quoting earlier. She said, when people say they don't want to work with the United States because they can't trust us to keep a secret, that's serious. When allies become concerned, when an asset's life is in jeopardy or the asset's family's life is in jeopardy, that's a problem. The point of intelligence is to be able to know what might happen to protect this country, and I could go on and on. Now, Mr. President, I've joined 10 of my colleagues in co-sponsoring a Senate resolution that urges the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder to appoint an independent special counsel to investigate classified information leaks by the administration. And yet, instead of a special counsel, the Attorney General has merely appointed 2 Justice Department attorneys to investigate the leaks. U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Ronald Machen, and his counterpart in Maryland, Rod Rosenstein. Although I have no question about their abilities, the appointment of these 2 Obama administration officials is unacceptable and raises questions as to their independence. A truly independent investigation would almost certainly reveal any breaches of the criminal law concerning classified information essential to national security. A truly independent counsel would have his or her own prosecutorial discretion. And if the administration leaks such information, the public has a right to know, and the public has a right to be outraged. The lives of Americans and our friends have already been put at risk. The Obama administration cannot be expected to pursue a complete self-investigation of allegations of this magnitude in the midst of an election. They simply cannot be asked to do this, especially when those responsible could well be members of the administration themselves. Attorney General Holder is a principal on the President's national security team. Members of this team may very well have been the sources of these leaks, members of the Attorney General's team. I want to ask this. Does the administration really want the truth in this? Or is the administration simply looking for cover? What is it about an independent special counsel that frightens this administration? Is it the truth that this administration is afraid of? And are Americans more likely to get the truth from a truly independent counsel or from U.S. attorneys who will still report directly to the Attorney General? The administration's concern about special counsels is understandable. If an independent counsel investigation reveals proof of leaks for political gain, it will not be pretty and will not sit well with the American people. Madam President, this Sunday marks the 40th anniversary of the Watergate break-in. It started small, but as more and more people began to ask questions and as more and more people began to demand a true investigation, the truth finally was revealed, and it brought down a presidency. Early on in Watergate, a member of my political party, a member of President Nixon's political party, a former nominee for president, Barry Goldwater, came forward to the American people and said, let's get the truth out. No more cover-ups. Let's get rid of the stink, and let's find out what was going on. Members of my party should have heeded the words of Barry Goldwater at that moment, and perhaps the scandal could have been brought to light, and people involved in a subsequent cover-up would not have been asked to do so. Barry Goldwater was right. Members of both political parties would be well advised today to ask this administration to come forward, appoint a truly independent counsel, to have a truly independent investigation of these breaches of national security. What I'm talking about today is evidence of criminal disclosures of national intelligence secrets, disclosures that have damaged our national security and continue to damage our national security. This issue is not going away. I urge the Attorney General, I urge my President to ensure confidence in government and to appoint a special counsel to investigate and hold accountable anyone responsible for these flagrant violations of our national security. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
The Senator from New Jersey.
Madam President, I rise